You make her lunch. Nothing unusual. Something she has eaten many times before. You put the plate down in front of her, and for a second, everything seems normal. Then she leans in closer and stops. Her face changes, and she pushes the plate away. There are bugs in it. You look down immediately. Of course you do. Because even though you know there are no bugs in it, part of you still reacts as though maybe you missed something. Hey, Christian Care Companion. Welcome to Dementia Caregiver Support for Christians, the podcast for faith-driven caregivers who want to glorify God through often very difficult process of dementia caregiving. Now, this particular situation today may not be as common. However, similar situations do happen. I want you to picture this person sitting at the table, and she pushes the plate away and tells you there are bugs in it. And you look down, and you know there are not. And you know that the food is fine. So you try again gently. No, honey, look, it's okay. You push the plate a little closer. You may try to explain it. You might even take a bite to show her yourself. But she's already pulling away. Then you try to give her something to drink. She takes the drink, she looks, and she says, there are bugs in that too. And now you're sitting there watching someone you love refuse food and water over something that is not actually there. These moments are incredibly disorienting for caregivers because part of you wants to reason your way back into a shared reality. Things like, if I can just explain it to her clearly enough so she understands there are no bugs in the food. If I reassure her there are no bugs in the food. If I just stay calm. Maybe if I give her something else to eat. Maybe it will work for this meal, and so you adapt. You give her something else. You change out the food. You give some soup, toast, maybe ice cream, something different, something sweeter. You keep working to find the thing that will work. And honestly, sometimes it will work for a few times, which makes it even harder because then you start to hope or expect, maybe I've fixed this problem until the next time it happens. And suddenly, the same thing happens a few days, a few weeks, a few months later. The suspicion, the refusal, the pulling away, the untouched food, the untouched drink. One of the hardest things about dementia caregiving is that caregivers often stay focused on solving each individual moment, each individual problem, without realizing that the overall situation is changing. Because this is really not about finding the correct food anymore. This has a deeper implication. What many caregivers are starting to encounter is that there is a change in the perception of reality itself. Her reality. She's not pretending to see bugs. She feels like she's really seeing bugs. She's not trying to be difficult on purpose. She's responding to what feels real to her. And that changes the entire situation. Because now we're not dealing with ordinary food preferences or being stubborn. You're dealing with a person whose brain is no longer reliably interpreting what she is seeing, tasting, processing, or trusting. And we feel the weight of this long before we know how to necessarily explain it. You might start to notice that meal times are taking longer, or the person's eating is becoming inconsistent, or they won't drink. So you monitor every bite every sip, every reaction. And slowly, without anybody formally announcing it, nutrition itself starts to become unstable in the home. That is the shift, especially because the requirement of needing food itself has not changed. She still needs food. She still needs hydration. She does need nourishment. But the old way of getting those things to her is no longer working. Many Christian caregivers struggle deeply here because they're trying to balance so many things at once. They want to preserve the person's dignity. They don't want to force them to eat. They don't want to scare her. They don't want every meal to be a conflict. And at the same time, you know and are watching somebody you love refuse the very things that will help keep them alive. I know this creates enormous tension inside you because love alone does not remove these increasing care requirements. And this is where many of us unknowingly get trapped in the constant adjustment mode, trying this, trying that, changing foods, changing cups, changing the routine, changing the time of day. None of that is wrong. And yes, you should try all of those things. However, if you do not address the underlying issue, none of those things are going to continue to work over time. I think this is one of the places where caregivers need permission to slow down and ask themselves a different question. Not, how do I get her to eat this particular meal? But overall, what is happening when eating itself is no longer happening? When they are no longer reliably getting enough food? This is a very different question. And repeated patterns do matter. Patterns tell you what is changing long before things actually change. And if someone is constantly refusing food or drink because of what they believe they are seeing, or because they're not hungry anymore, or because they cannot taste the food anymore, those things have implications, not just for today, but for hydration, medication, weight loss, how much strength they have, balance, their future care needs, and eventually their overall safety. This is not said to make you panic. And this is not to have you drastically jump to some sort of a conclusion about end of life. However, it does mean that we need to stop looking at each meal as an isolated problem or an isolated instance, because often the real issue is not isolated. The real issue is that the whole situation is becoming more medically complex, more cognitively complex, and structurally more complex than what we have recognized or said out loud yet. This is where caregivers often feel grief because we know and recognize if somebody we love is not eating, we know what that ultimately will result in, because eating is relational, eating is cultural, meals are relational, family dinners, holidays, Mother's Day, conversations, learning to cook, coffee together. And now all of those things are starting to change because the person you are helping is no longer trusting the food that is in front of them. This is hard. And most of us try to keep doing the same old things, trying different tactics. And yet again, None of that is wrong. We do want the person to eat or drink. We want to try these kinds of strategies and tactics. However, we also need to recognize that the situation itself has changed the conditions underneath the eating and drinking. That is why it feels exhausting, because you're not only carrying tasks, you're carrying the emotional collision between love and truth and dignity and responsibility and autonomy and dependence. And many of us do it alone. So if you recognize yourself in today's situation, I don't want you to hear that you're doing it wrong. I want you to recognize that there is a deeper reality underneath what you are seeing. Because when the same situation keeps repeating, the requirements around that situation are often increasing, whether we have named it out loud or not. And sometimes the most important shift, not finding the perfect food, sometimes the most important shift is that this is changing. And we may have to start thinking differently about what that now means. Now, if you want to stay connected to this work, I invite you to go to thinkdifferentdementia.com or shoot me an email if this episode resonated with you at lizette@thinkdifferentdementia.com. But for now, I want you to pay attention to what is happening, what is repeating, and decide what do you maybe need to change. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you love. Share it with a sibling, a parent, somebody who is caring for somebody living with dementia. And as I end or try to remember to end all of the episodes, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and I will see you in the next episode.